See everybody today. So this week we've been working on sweeping with the closed guard. So our sweeping concept sees us accessing levers on our opponent's body and shifting their center of gravity. Last class we were talking about utilizing our hip bump sweep from that closed guard position. I'll demonstrate that just so that we can kind of get a reminder of the context that we're working with here. So I'm starting on the feet. I grip up and pull my opponent into my closed guard. Using my regulated tension here with the grips, I feel my opponent start to lean backwards. I ride them up with the collar grips. I'm catching their elbow, and I use my hip bump sweep to make them fall over and come up into a top position. From here, I'm going to maintain the mount, stabilizing with my hands and my connection with the legs. So the hip bump sweep is a very beginner-friendly technique. We're using the closed guard, which is a very safe position. And that hip bump sweep is really commonly seen because that reaction of trying to pull away from us is very common, right? So we're going to follow them with that hip bump sweep. So what we're going to look at tonight, though, is we're going to look at the flower sweep. And the flower sweep is, again, going to be a great tool in our arsenal of closed guard sweeps. Now, I'm going to demonstrate the flower sweep first. We're going to do a couple variations of this sweep tonight, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it's going to work. All right, guys? So let's check out the flower sweep. We're going to start the same way by pulling our opponent into our closed guard. And let's check out our flower sweep. Here we go. So again, this is a sweep that I'm using from the closed guard that will take me directly to the mount. Okay, we always say this, guys, but it's an important thing for us to realize, a little principle. The closed guard is just the mount. You're just upside down, okay? So if we can keep that in mind, anytime we have the ability to make our opponent fall over and come up when we have the closed guard, we're going to get directly to the mount. And the mount is one of the most dominant positions in Jiu Jitsu, okay? And again, of course, it's also a very great position in competition. That scores us a lot of points. So let's talk about how we're going to use the flower sweep. So the flower sweep is going to see us getting opposite corner rotational control on our opponent. So what that means is I'm going to be controlling two opposite corners of his body. We're going to start off with a very classic variation of the flower sweep. We're going to be grabbing a sleeve and the pant grip. Let's talk a little bit about context. Why would we utilize a flower sweep? Let's say my opponent is not giving me the reaction of leaning backwards. So my hip bump sweep is going to be a little bit more difficult to do, especially if he has his hands on my body like this and he's not leaning backwards. I can't really sit up. He's holding me down. So this presents a great opportunity to use the flower sweep. From here, we're going to start off by getting a sleeve grip with one hand. So I like to use the left hand, so that way my right hand can be a little bit more mobile since that's my dominant hand. So my left hand, is going to grab the sleeve. And my right hand is going to reach down. I'm going to do a slight oblique crunch, and I'm going to reach down, and I'm going to grab the side of his pant leg. Now, let's make a slight rotation here so that we can see how I'm grabbing, guys. I'm utilizing a cuff grip on the sleeve here, so just like I was playing spider guard. So I'm rolling my fingers onto the top of the sleeve. And my right hand is going to reach down, and I'm going to grab the side of his pant leg. So I want to be clear with this. There's a little bit of legality issue here with the pant grip. We're not allowed to stick our four fingers inside of our opponent's pants. That's illegal. That's an illegal grip. The reason it's illegal is for safety reasons, I guess, but it's a silly reason, but it also doesn't help us get as good of a punch. So there is actual technical reasons behind the preference for holding the side. But again, I don't want to stick four fingers inside of his pants. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bunch up the material here by the side of his shin, and I'm going to roll the material and squeeze it hard. So now I have a really strong pant grip. So look what I have here. I have opposite corners of his body under my control, his arm and his leg. So if we think back to our sweeping concept, I'm accessing levers on his body. Now I just need to shift his center of gravity, and that'll allow me to put his hips down and come up. So the way that we're going to make him fall over is we're going to utilize a post with our left foot, and I'll show this from a different angle in a moment, a post with our left foot, and I'm going to be using my right leg to access his spine as a lever to shift his center of gravity over his base. To do this, I'm going to take my leg, and I'm going to hopefully kick him in the armpit. Okay, I'll tell you why I'm saying hopefully in a second, but I'm hopefully going to kick him up here in the armpit, and notice how that starts to shift him forward. I'm going to combine that with a stomping motion across his shoulders. Look at how I'm really starting to tip him. Now, remember that pant grip we had here, guys. Look what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to start to push this leg up into the sky as I come up on my rear elbow. This will now allow me to ride his momentum by holding onto this pant leg and allow me to come straight up to the mount here. So again, I'm shifting his center of gravity, and then as I pick that leg up, he's not going to be able to maintain a strong enough post to stop himself from falling. Now, let's take a look at the other side so you guys can see how I'm planting my foot, and we'll explain why we're utilizing that post here. So again, from this position, guys, I'm going to get my grips. I'm starting with that strong closed guard position. I feel him sort of stable. I feel him not giving me any overreactions. So I'm going to reach down, grab the sleeve, and grab the pant leg. From here, I want my left foot to envelop his leg. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to stop his leg from being able to move out. If I start to kick him, he can theoretically open his knee up, which can, again, widen his base to allow him to hold his center of gravity up. So I'm using my left heel to hold his leg in place. Again, I'm going to use this right leg to kick him up at a 45-degree angle, and you see how I'm shifting him over this controlled lever. So I'm holding onto his arm so he can't post that hand out. If I'm not grabbing the sleeve, he can catch himself. So I'm holding that arm close to me, and now I'm going to start to stomp this foot forward as I lift his leg. And that lift will allow me to ride up on top and get to a top position. Now, let me just show one little sort of troubleshooting thing that you might run into. If your opponent has good, solid structure, they're going to do the right thing, and they're going to keep their elbows tight. This is why I was saying, hopefully, we're going to be able to get into the armpit, right? If I do this, in the perfect way, my leg will go up into his armpit like this. However, if he has really good structure, that might not happen. So all we're going to do is we're just going to use this frame to act almost like a piston to shift his center of gravity. So I'm still going to kick him, but I'm just going to take my thigh and I'm going to kick into his elbow. I'm accomplishing the same exact reaction, but I'm just using, instead of directly accessing his spine as a lever, I'm using like this piston effect of kicking his elbow, which will shift his center of gravity here. Again, I come up, and I get to my top position. All right, guys, I'm going to show one more time slow motion without talking. If you have any questions, let me know. We'll start on the feet here. Here we go. Coming up to a top position. All right, does anybody have any questions? Okay, guys, you may have noticed I did a slight kazushi, a slight off balancing when I was here. As soon as I got my grips, I used my knees to tuck a little bit. This generated a little bit of movement, and that can allow me to take them over easier. So feel free to incorporate any type of kazushi that we can use. We're going to talk about some more nuanced variations here next, what to do when our opponent actually knows jiu-jitsu and they're not just going to sit there, right? We'll talk more about utilizing kazushi and, of course, utilizing some other variations. All right, guys, let's try this flower sweep, and then we'll get to work. Let's go. 1, 2. Does anybody have any questions on the flower sweep so far? We're going to continue to add on to this. We're going to address some dilemmas that can occur. First, I just have a couple common errors that I was noticing with that classic variation you guys are just working on. So first, I want to ensure that we're using that like 45-degree maneuver, right, where I'm trying to kick him almost over our shoulder here. If I try to kick him laterally across my body, it's hard for me to start to push him over, right? Because if we think about jiu-jitsu, remember, it's a battle of frames and levers. His leg is a frame whether we like it or not. So if I try to move him over this knee, see how it's positioned here almost 45 degrees from his body. If I try to push him over that leg, he can resist. Even if I have the foot here, he can still resist. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to essentially put his shoulder where there's no frame that will allow him to stay up. So that's why we're going at a 45-degree angle first. You might notice how he's posting this hand. This doesn't matter, okay? He's not going to be able to maintain his alignment even if he posts his hand down, because as I move his body, this arm is at the wrong angle to hold himself up. This hand would be a problem, because now this post is matching the force vector that I'm driving into it. If he posts the other hand, this is a very awkward post. This is not going to hold his body up. So as I start to drive, he's not going to be able to maintain the position. Now, I was mentioning a little bit earlier how we can utilize a slight kazushi. Kazushi just means off balancing. I can utilize a slight kazushi to start to move him forward towards me. This is especially useful if you're having trouble getting the pant grip. So let's rotate to that side. So especially if your opponent has more of a fitted gi, which, is modern and popular nowadays. If they have a kind of a fitted gi, it can be kind of hard to grab the pant leg. So look what I can do. I can start to pull his base forward and see how that opens up this space here. It allows more fabric to be accessed. So again, if you encountered that where you're like, man, their gi's real tight, I can't really grab anything, that means they're ready for competition, right? They got a good competition gi. But that also means that we can start to move them a little bit. and then grab. Here's one thing that we need to realize, guys. These grips are a telltale sign that we're going to be doing a flower sweep, okay? And then real quick, though, this is also sometimes called a pendulum sweep, so just in case you guys hear either name, they're basically the same thing, okay? Flower sweep, pendulum sweep. So again, these grips are a pretty telltale sign that we're going to be doing a flower sweep. So I can't sort of be lackadaisical when I get this. As soon as I have these grips, a good jiu-jitsu player is going to understand what I'm starting to do, and they're going to defend accordingly. So I need to make sure that I'm immediately grabbing and moving. You see how I start to off-balance him as soon as I find the grips. I can even perform the kazushi before even grabbing, right? Look, I can tuck the knees in and then grab. Now, because his alignment is off, see how his posture's broken? Now he needs to be scrambling to fix that, and while he is, I'm performing the sweep. So I'd like us to do one more round of practicing the standard variation here. I'd like you to now incorporate utilizing the kazushi to off-balance them forward to open up the pant grip, but also to get their center of gravity moving, and be a little bit more confident with our grip scheme, okay? All I mean is instead of kind of going 1, 2, let's try to go same time, right? Get your grips immediately so we can right away off-balance them. Okay, guys? We'll do one more round of the standard variation, and then we're going to move into our underhook variation next. Any questions? Let's go. 1, 2. Let's move into our second variation now. It's still going to be flower sweep, so you're still going to do the exact same technique. We're just going to add in some variables that are going to be very common for us to encounter. In case you guys didn't realize, it's called a flower sweep because your legs are kind of like opening and blossoming like a flower. It's also, I guess, called a pendulum sweep because you're using your leg to swing. So that's kind of where both those names originate from. So now let's talk about how to utilize an underhook to allow us to maintain a tighter control of our opponent's leg. This is obviously going to be the primary variation for no-gi, or this is going to be a primary variation we'll utilize when we cannot get the pant grip or when our opponent steps up. So let's take a look. So I have my opponent in my closed guard position. And now from here, I still have the sleeve grip. Maybe I'm just unable to get the pant grip I'm looking for, or maybe he knows that I want that pant grip. So one thing he might try to do is step this foot up to defend the grip, right? So as I'm here, boom, he might try to step that leg away. If he steps this knee up, we're going to utilize an underhook and then perform the exact same sweep. So all I'm doing is I'm still gaining lever access, just that instead of using proxy control, so proxy control is I use a material or a loop around his limb to control that limb. I am directly controlling that limb, so I'm utilizing an underhook to control this limb. Now this underhook is very powerful. If I can ever get my limbs in between my opponent's limbs, as we know, we call that inside position. If I can ever get inside position, that's a benefit to me. So if I can get my underhook, that's a really strong spot. So again, one time where we can utilize this is if our opponent starts to step this leg up, we can start to utilize our underhook. Notice, however, I'm creating the exact same angle as we did before, and I'm still going to create that same kick and stomp effect. I can maintain the grip here and ride my way up to the mount. However, this is not the only situation that we can utilize the underhook. In fact, there's another spot where we like to talk about if your opponent gives you sort of a bad look, right? Your opponent's not necessarily doing good jiu-jitsu. We just want to understand how we can capitalize on that. So if your opponent is making this mistake where their hands are on the mat and they're kind of leaning forwards and they're not in good jiu-jitsu base, okay? When they're in this position, this again gives us another opportunity to do the flower sweep, and we are going to use that underhook. Now with this variation, we're just going to change the grip that we're going to use in the beginning. Because I can't really grab the sleeve, I'm going to use an underhook. So look at that. We're using 2 underhooks now. So I'm using an underhook here. I'm loading his arm up onto my shoulder. I'm getting to this wrapped position here with my underhook. I can now underhook his leg, and here we are in that same flower sweep orientation. I perform that 45-degree kick as I stomp my foot to the mat. As I'm coming up, I'd like to maintain this opposite corner rotational control. See how I'm controlling his arm and his leg. These are opposite corners of his body. As I come up, I can then maintain my top spot. So with this second variation, the underhook, we have 2 options that we can play with now. Either our opponent starts to defend the pant grip by stepping the leg up, or our opponent is just making some big errors, which we do want to understand how to capitalize on. So they're just going to drop their microphone on the mat and then kind of post their hands out on the floor, okay? So let's see this one more time. All right, so I'm here. So first, I want to do the classic variation. I got the sleeve grip. I'm going for the pant grip, but he starts to step that leg up. I can't really grab the pant. So I'm going to continue to dive under, create my underhook. And now from here, I'm using that 45-degree kick, and I'm shifting his center of gravity over. With this underhook, guys, you may have noticed I didn't really need to plant my foot. Planting the foot is a good redundancy to have, in effect, but because I have this underhook, it's much more powerful as a lifting mechanic. So you don't necessarily need to plant that foot as much, because even if he widens his base with that knee, I'm still gonna overwhelm that. All right, but again, if you wanna have that redundancy, we can plant that foot there to make it even more powerful. Okay, guys? That's your first option. And then again, the other option, if you just kind of like go in baby mode right here, look, I go underhook, underhook, and I use that to sweep him, okay? Again, these are great variations for gi and no gi, because remember, in no gi, we don't got this stuff to hold on to, okay? So let's try out this underhook variation now, and then we'll get a chance to finish up by just talking about how we can utilize a hip bump to flower sweep combination. Then we'll do some live training. All right, guys, any questions on this? Underhook, make sure you really bring that leg over to your ear, okay? I'm trying to bring the two pieces together and then sweep them. Let's go, 1, 2. All right, any questions on the two variations we've looked at today, guys? We're just gonna do one more concept, one more option, okay? And that's gonna be combining the hip bump sweep that we worked on Tuesday to this flower sweep that we did tonight. So here's why we wanna understand how to create this combination. In Jiu Jitsu, when we're one note, we only have one thing that we're doing. Our opponent only has one thing they need to defend. So oftentimes, when our opponent has a sufficient way to defend that, we're gonna have a difficult time attacking and sweeping and coming up on top, or doing whatever your goal is, submitting, taking them down, whatever it might be. However, if we can mix two movements together, we force them to have to basically defend many fields, and we present a dilemma. If they don't fall for the first technique, we'll make them fall with the second technique. If they don't fall for the second technique, we can cycle back to the first technique. And this is something that we can do with all of our techniques in Jiu Jitsu, but let's look at now how we can do that with our guard. So again, we're gonna be starting off by using that hip bump sweep to force our opponent to make the reaction that can then set up the flower sweep. Let's take a look. So as we looked on Tuesday, anytime my opponent starts to lean backwards, I can start to sit up and follow them for my hip bump. However, what's the most common way that he would defend the hip bump? He would try to push me back down to the mat. If he tries to push me back down, he's going into a position where I can start to perform my flower sweep. If he's back, I can go hip bump. If he starts to come down, I can go flower sweep. So if we understand this, we can start to use that reaction against him. He's going to set up the technique that I'm going to do, right? So if he's leaning back, as I come up with my hip bump, he might start to push me back down. When he pushes me back down, I can go back for my flower sweep. If he starts to overcompensate and come up out of the flower sweep part, I can come back up to my hip bump. And you can see how we can start to create this dilemma effect of one sweep which can lead to another. So what I want us to do for right now is just stick with the basic one of just, let's use that hip bump. I want the top person, you're gonna start to push them back down, and that's gonna allow the bottom person to do the flower sweep. There's one little adjustment that we're gonna make. So as I start to come up here, I'm hitting the hip bump sweep. He's gonna start to push me back down. Maybe I failed the sweep, I didn't catch the elbow, or maybe he's very strong. So look what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna bring my arm back across, and I'm gonna catch his elbow on the other side. I wanna make sure that I keep his elbow under my control, because that's the arm he's gonna post with. Now it's my choice. If I wanna go underhook or the pant grip, you do either one, guys. It really doesn't matter. We'll do whichever one you feel comfortable doing at that point. But it's just the same flower sweep. We were just using his reaction out of the hip bump sweep to set it up, okay? Let's see that again from a different angle. So I'll show it from here so that way you can see how we're controlling this elbow. So again, maybe I just pulled him into my closed guard. He starts to lean back. I follow, but now he's starting to push me down. So look what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna bring my arm back across. You may remember how last class we talked about abandoning that hip bump sweep and going back to the closed guard. This is a very similar movement. I'm going to start to go back down, but as I do, my hips are going to rebound over in the other direction. So I shouldn't stop with my hips on the floor. If I stop with my hips on the floor, so for an example, I sit up, he pushes me down, Ready, set, here I go. You see, if I have that moment where I've stopped, he's now grounded me, and now it's gonna be hard for me to follow him up, okay? So I want it to be like a trampoline. As soon as my back touches, whoop, I go right over to the other side and complete the flower sweep. So I'll show once more. So again, maybe I have my grips, he's falling back, I sit up with him. As he pushes me down, I trap his other arm, I sweep, and I come up to the mount position. So we're utilizing that concept of the dilemma effect to force our opponent to react to our first technique, then we can sweep them with the other one. Okay, so we're gonna go hip bump to flower sweep. Any questions? Okay, guys, take your time. You don't have to rush. Top person, all you're doing is just gently pushing their hips back down, okay? This is even more effective if your partner tries to like body lock you or like hug your body because they're already trapping their own arm, okay? So like if Coach Seth does the hip bump sweep to me, and I start to come here and like body lock him, oh, this is very good because now I've already trapped my own arm. So I've kind of spelled my own fate. All right, guys, so let's finish up with this. We're gonna have a chance to finish by drilling this variation. I also want you guys to practice the other options we were working on, okay? Don't pigeonhole yourself to just this combination right now. I want you to practice all the things we've done tonight, and then we're gonna get a chance to add them into our specific training rounds next. Any questions? Let's get to work, guys. 1, 2.